How our racist child support laws hurt poor black fathers the most. During his senior year of high school, star quarterback Perkins impregnated 3 young women from his hometown, a tiny place in Georgia called Forsyth. It all happened at once. 2 of his daughters were born on the same day, and his son was born 2 months later. Perkins, who had won a football scholarship to Valdosta State, was 17 years old when he had to start paying child support. I wasn't mentally ready, he says. I got put on child support for all 3 at one time. His father helped with payments in the beginning, and Perkins admitted he wasn't a present father at first. At that time at school, being young and wild, I wasn't focused. After a year and a half of college, Perkins dropped out and moved back home. It took a while to kick in to understand I had 3 kids and a lot of responsibility. All non-custodial parents, the overwhelming majority of them whom are men, are legally obligated to pay child support. But for those who are poor, it simply compounds their poverty. The racial wage gap shows that white men get paid an average of $21 an hour, while black men get paid an average of $15 an hour. Child support data isn't collected by race, but given black men's disadvantage in the workplace, it's safe to presume they are also disproportionately owe child support when they cannot afford it. 25% of people in this system shouldn't be there because they're too poor, says David J. Pate, an associate professor of social work at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Those $10,000 or even $20,000 earners, the government, according to Pate, is owed $115 billion in child support, but 70% of that money is owed by Americans who make less than $10,000 a year. Once Perkins dropped out of college, he spent the next decade of his life figuring out how to become a good man who takes care of his children. But without a college degree in a town where 18% of people live under the poverty line, finding a job to support his 3 children was tough. I remember I got a job working at the Interstate Ford dealership at a time when I got a check for $0, he says. His paycheck had all gone to child support. He said he was frustrated and trying to run around and hustle to make his money. Jail is appropriate for someone who's actively hiding assets, not for someone who couldn't pay child support in the first place. Throughout his adult life, Perkins said he's had endless odd jobs, from cutting grass to helping a cousin with framing and roofing. I went to school to cut hair and got my license, he says, but this is such a small town, there's only 2 barbers here. No one would let me cut their hair. He did anything he could do to make ends meet, but no matter what, he always came up short. I met Perkins last month in Forsyth in the town's upscale restaurant, Grits Cafe, where we drank an iced tea together. The 35-year-old was dressed in a collared shirt, tie, and slacks, and nervously admitted that even though he grew up in Forsyth, he'd never been to Grits Cafe. He also confessed he wasn't sure he had dressed correctly for the occasion. We were meeting there after this year's Parental Accountability Court graduation. There were 10 graduates that day, most of whom were black men, and they were there to get their diplomas for completing a year-long state-run program to pay off their child support rather than going to jail for failing to pay. The graduates today had paid off their debt for at least 6 months. At 1 p.m., when most folks were off eating lunch and escaping the hot Georgia summer, a stream of local government officials, family, and friends poured into the upstairs courtroom doors for the ceremony. That day, the state of Georgia was happy. It was the program's 4th graduation, and the numbers were looking good. There have been 2,711 successful graduates and 4,780 children who have benefited, and the state has been paid back $2.8 million in child support and saved $10 million in incarceration costs. Wait a minute. Run that back. They saved more in locking people up than they got paid back in child support. That boggles my mind. Continuing. But the question still lingered. Should these parents be forced to pay child support at all? There are efforts by the government to change child support policy, but the Obama administration and the Commissioner for the Office of Child Support Enforcement, Vicky Turetsky, had been outspoken about changes for non-custodial parents who cannot pay child support. In fact, there was a 2011 Supreme Court ruling mandating that lower courts keep parents out of jail unless they are sure he or she can pay the debt. I think black people need to take advantage of that. But conservatives are against the idea, claiming that it undercuts the value of personal responsibility. When the Obama administration proposed new regulations on child support that would take away harsh burdens from poor non-custodial parents, Orrin Hatch, the Republican senator from Utah, said it was a bad idea. Deadbeat parents, not hardworking taxpayers, should be held accountable for their financial responsibilities, he said in a press release. But activists at Turetsky insist it's not that simple. Jail is appropriate for someone who is actively hiding assets, not appropriate for someone who cannot pay the order in the first place, Turetsky told the New York Times. Kids remember memories. A 3 or 4-year-old child doesn't know about money. During a struggle to find adequate employment, Perkins was sent to jail on 3 separate occasions before 2011 for not paying child support. He said he has struggled to understand why he was forced to pay the government. He would rather the government focus be placed on co-parenting and actually giving parents the ability to spend time with their children as opposed to putting so much emphasis on money. Agreed. Kids remember memories, Perkins says. A 3 or 4-year-old child doesn't know about money. They don't care about money. You can take your child to the McDonald's and watch them play in the playground for free, and they'll remember that all their life. At times, Perkins says, he butt heads with Stacy Sitton, his beloved counselor and the region's parent accountability coordinator, on the philosophical issue of his debt. Why I gotta pay you when I can pay my child directly? He recalled asking Sitton. But he says the counselor explained to him it's an order. It's the law, and there's nothing she could do about the law. But something can be done. A state can decide whether to award child support to the custodial parent or keep the money. If the mother is on temporary assistance or for needy families, he or she is not necessarily entitled to any or all of the child support paid by the non-custodial parent. That money goes to the government. Sitton says the money non-custodial parent pays does not go to the state unless a custodial parent was receiving TANF. The problem with alternative to incarceration programs run by the state, Pate says, is they are a conflict of interest. It's a government program, says Pate. The children, he says, are generally the beneficiaries of child support. They're not getting the money, the government is. Despite his reservations about the complexity of the system, for Perkins, the program was a success. Perkins, who ended up marrying the mother of one of his 3 kids in 2006, had just completed paying $2,000 in back child support for his 2 other children who are now 18. Wow, okay. The program helped him get a job with a better income, which he's thankful for. He took a truck driver's course during his time in the program, and he's been working for a company that pays him between $500 and $700 a week and sends him home to his family every night. To be able to catch up and be done, it's a great feeling, Perkins says. Earlier this year, Perkins took his wife and 3 children on vacation to Orlando. We did a timeshare at an all-inclusive resort. It's something they'll never forget, something I'll never forget. It was the first vacation Perkins was able to afford for his family, and he credits the Alternative to Incarceration program for helping him get there. But Pate sees these programs are a Band-Aid. Rather than attacking the real problem, we need to think a lot more creatively about how we deal with race and poverty in America. As Carla Meyerson is a reporter at Fusion with a focus on race and politics. She lives in Brooklyn. This one was sent to me by Dr. T. And I think, well, back in the 80s, when these laws, these draconian laws started being passed, it was actually, as always, it was basically these strict laws were actually passed against black men because there was a perception that black men were seeding women willy-nilly with kids that they couldn't support, when the actual deadbeat dads that the law should have been intended for were actually white men. The original deadbeat dads were white men that were actually upper middle class, that made over $100,000 a year on high assets. But under Bill Clinton, these TANF laws got filtered all the way down to the men that couldn't support it, and they started giving out, bare minimum child support payments. So in other words, you could be dead broke with no job, and you'd had to pay $150 in a month for child support when you couldn't feed yourself. And these draconian laws that basically they started in the 80s under Reagan and then Bush, and then Bill Clinton actually came and put it over the top. But it just like Me Too started out being what Mike man is the face of the deadbeat dad. It didn't take long for black men to start getting the brunt of this. And I remember so many black guys got destroyed by these draconian child support laws that are actually passed in the 90s. Way too many brothers. I mean, I know more than a few brothers that worked themselves to death trying to pay child support. Way too many. And in some instances it actually worked, because trust and believe, when I looked at it before these child support laws really started kicking in, I think the fertility rate for black women was damn near 3. And they basically cut that in half. And some of it is from birth control and abortion, but a lot of it is because black men wear condoms. Especially after 1996. The condom use of black men actually spiked and doubled, and basically fertility rate went down basically 6 or 7 points since 20 years. So, and that's a huge drop. It doesn't seem like it, but we went from above replacement to below replacement in 20 years. Because most black guys are actually deathly afraid of the child support laws. I mean, deathly afraid. In fact, 40% of black men have no children and probably will never have children. 50% of black men will never get married. Some of that has to do with black women, but a lot of this has to do with the laws that are in place. And the biggest, as always, the biggest group of people going to jail for child support are black men. In fact, you saw, I think there was a brother in Virginia who was in South Carolina, where he actually got out of the car and started running away from the cop because he didn't want to go back to jail for child support anymore. He actually got shot by that cop in the back because he was running away. And this dude wasn't young. He was in his 50s. So, there's a whole saying that there are two things that's certain, death and taxes. And for black men, you can add a third, which is child support. And I think that black men are less afraid of death than child support and taxes. But I thought I would read this. This is interesting, and I don't know if this is written by a white woman or what. From the name, it sounds like a white woman that actually wrote it. And they should look at this. I mean, if 70% of the people that owe child support, and we know when they said under $10,000, we know they're talking about black men. If 70% of the back child support owed is from people that make $10,000, that means at $10,000 you can't feed or house yourself at $10,000. I mean, you are well below the poverty line at $10,000. You are virtually, there's Social Security recipients that make more money than that a year. How can you pay child support when you need food stamps to supplement yourself and feed yourself? It doesn't make sense. It does not make sense. It doesn't make sense. You can't find these people jobs. You can't put these people to work. You can't find jobs. When you got guys that can't find a job, hadn't found a job in 5 years, and then they have a backlog of child support arrears that are waiting for them when they do find a job. So the thing is, you're decentivizing this guy to actually go out and find a legitimate job. And you're making these guys hustle on the block just to eat instead of coming to the table and working something out. Like I said, if you can If you can forgive trillions of dollars to bankers, if you can forgive trillions of dollars in tax payments to corporations, you can't fine $110 billion to kind of actually, if you can't forgive it all, at least lessen the amount that these guys that are actually in poverty will never dig themselves out. I mean, $110 billion is nothing. That's a 1/7 of the defense budget. You just gave the Defense Department $100 billion. You just gave the Defense Department $100 billion. You're jailing guys for child support, and it costs you more to jail them than their child support. It'd be cheaper for you to pay the child support than to jail them. That's the crazy part. It's cheaper. You saw that. The payments that they got was less than the amount it would have cost to actually put these people in jail. It costs more to put a black man in jail than it does to find him work and give him a job. For what it costs to hold that guy for a month, you could have just gave the mother a check, and you probably would have come out better. It cost you less. They said, well, it shouldn't be borne on the backs of taxpayers. Who the fuck you think is actually paying to lock these guys up? Who do you think the jails are supported by? It ain't corporations that are paying money into locking people up. They're not paying that. It's taxpayers. And it's a shell game. So it comes out of your educational budget. It comes out of your roads. It comes out of your pensions. And conservatives and conservative white people are too dumb to actually do accounting. And you have economists that keep parroting this stuff, that know this stuff, that actually can work the numbers, that they won't come to common sense. Being a conservative is about common sense, not punishment. Spending $70,000 a year to lock somebody up for stealing a loaf of bread doesn't make sense. Loaf of bread costs $1. And you're going to charge the taxpayers $35,000 to $70,000 to lock up somebody for a fucking loaf of bread. A guy that has $1,000 child support payment. For $2,000, you're going to lock him up and you're going to spend $30,000. That's the insanity of America. That's an insanity of this white racist system. Anyway, let me stop ranting. Let me get off of here. This is BGS out, and I will see you black folks on the next one.